On this Wednesday night, promises for action on long-term care. Ontario's government assumes control of 5 more private care facilities.
I want eyes and ears in the homes that we're most worried about.
As more heartbreaking stories emerge.
I get a panic call from the nurse saying that my mother is not breathing.
The calls for accountability on caring for our elders. Breaking news, a major legal loss, a pivotal decision about Huawei's CFO.
Rita can't breathe.
And amplified calls for justice.
The world witnessed murder.
Anger intensifies over the death of a black man handcuffed and pinned to the ground by a white officer.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There's another report from the military tonight on grim conditions inside some Canadian long-term care homes. This one is from Quebec, where soldiers were called in to help in 25 homes overwhelmed by COVID-19. The report is 60 pages long, though not as detailed about the shortcomings as were exposed in Ontario care homes yesterday. It says soldiers witnessed some exceptionally difficult situations, including staffing shortages, problems with PPE, and issues with how residents with COVID-19 are handled. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford today promised swift action to remedy the deplorable conditions found in some homes. He announced more inspections and said the government is taking over management of 5 more of Ontario's hardest-hit facilities.
In the face of these problems, we'll use every tool at our disposal. And that means staying on top of the situation in these homes. We need boots on the ground. I want eyes and ears in the homes that we're most worried about, keeping a close watch.
Right now, soldiers have been the only outside eyes and ears, and advocates for the elderly say what they exposed is terrible but not new. Failings in long-term care, especially inadequate staff and low pay, are long-standing. The pandemic has made pre-existing problems worse. There remain active outbreaks in 199 long-term care homes in Ontario and 131 long-term care homes in Quebec. We'll get to Ontario and demands for accountability in just a moment, but we begin with Mike Armstrong and Quebec's care home crisis.
Soldiers have been working in this Montreal seniors residence for more than a month, and we now know how it's going. According to the report released Wednesday, almost every single day, there's some sort of an incident that disrupts the routine. Now, what that means exactly, we don't know. The military's report into Quebec long-term care facilities is quite different than the one for Ontario. Whereas that one listed incidents, some of them horrifying, the Quebec document is more of a situation report. It gives the staffing and infection rates for each of the 25 residences where soldiers are working, and then has a section for comments. Most of those comments flag issues with communication, management, PPE, and discipline, and a critical shortage of staff. Patients' rights advocates say not much of it is surprising.
There are not enough staff, and anyone who's had a loved one in long-term care will tell you that.
We lack training and we lack supervision. What the military are observing is the result.
The crisis didn't start.
Quebec's premier says he didn't learn much from the report. Most of the problems, he says, are the result of what he calls embarrassing staff shortages that existed before COVID-19, but were made worse by it. The Army was supposed to be a month-and-a-half stopgap, but that gap is still there.
I've asked Mr. Trudeau this morning if we can keep people from the Army until September 15.
Legault says he needs the soldiers in place while new staff is trained. The province is going on a hiring binge with significantly higher wages. New orderlies, for example, would start at close to $50,000 a year. Now, it is also staffing that's being blamed by unions for the awful conditions flagged in the Ontario report. They say workers don't have enough time to give proper care, and they fear for their jobs if they go public with what's going on.
I know that frontline workers want to do more in speaking out for themselves in the conditions, but they live under this reign of terror and fear.
The question now is how these two reports might affect the relationship between soldiers and civilian staff. Could there be resentment that troops are being seen as whistleblowers? Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
These military reports have exposed failings on many levels. David Akin is looking into accountability tonight. David?
Yeah, well, Donna, let's start with those Ontario facilities that were flagged in that Canadian Forces report. Remember, there are investigations underway, and they will find out if the operators or even some employees violated regulations, perhaps even broke some laws, and there could be some serious consequences. An operator could see their license pulled, there could be fines, maybe even jail time. And as you heard, the Premier has ramped up a surveillance program. This is going to affect not just the 20 homes identified as hotspots, but all homes in Ontario, all 626, with an enhanced inspection routine. And then there's the political accountability. The Premier today saying that an independent commission is going to get underway in July, and that commission is going to have the power to compel testimony from the Premier and anyone in Cabinet. Sounds very much to me like the Premier wants some answers.
When we have the auditor, we have the coroner, we have the police, we have an independent commission, I'll tell you, there won't be a piece of dust on the floor that they aren't going to be inspecting.
Now, the industry group that represents these facility operators says the answers are really pretty clear. Need more personal protective equipment, need more access to rapid testing, need more money to fix up the facilities, and need more flexibility when it comes to staffing scarce resources. Donna?
David, there are problems to varying degrees in care homes right across the country. Is there a role for the federal government and national standards?
Yes, I think there is. In fact, there was quite an appetite for that here in Ottawa today. Parliamentarians were talking just exactly about that, saying that Ottawa should set guidelines and regulations for facilities right across the country. We asked the Prime Minister about that, but today he was not prepared to set himself towards any particular course of action.
There will be many important discussions going forward on how we establish a better system in Canada. And I'm not going to, short-circuit that conversation by putting forward aggressive proposals right now.
Now, I can tell you, Donna, that this crisis in our long-term care facilities is going to be at the top of the agenda when the Prime Minister and the Premiers have their weekly teleconference call tomorrow evening.
David Akin in Ottawa, thank you. The reports from the military are grim. Later in the broadcast, Jeff Semple speaks with a woman who says she learned how her mother died by reading the Ontario report. First, a quick note on antibody testing tonight. The American Centers for Disease Control is urging decision makers not to rely on antibody test results to decide on reopening offices or letting students gather in schools. Antibody tests look at serum in blood for evidence your immune system has fought off an infection or virus in the past. A positive test means you could be immune for COVID-19. And the test could help monitor community spread. But new evidence from the CDC shows if antibody testing is carried out in a population where cases of COVID-19 are low, there can be many false positives. And it's possible less than half of those testing positive will truly have the antibodies. A recovery crew has located the wreckage of the Canadian Armed Forces helicopter that crashed off the coast of Greece last month. The remains of fallen service members were found nearby. A remote-operated vehicle located a large piece of the Cyclone helicopter's fuselage. It's lying more than 3,000 meters below the surface. The helicopter was carrying 6 Canadian Forces members from HMCS Fredericton when it went down on April 29th. The U.S. is assisting with the recovery operation, and an investigation into the crash is ongoing. The remains of just 2 of the victims have been positively identified so far. A big decision in BC's Supreme Court today. Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou lost the first round of her attempt to avoid extradition to the United States, where she's accused of fraud and violating sanctions against Iran. The decision rests on the concept of double criminality, essentially that a crime in the U.S. must be a crime here as well. It means Meng Wanzhou stays put under house arrest in Vancouver, and it ratchets up the tension between Canada and China, which has accused Canada of being an accomplice of the United States. Robin Gill explains the ruling.
Meng Wanzhou did not have a look of defeat going into BC's Supreme Court, but this wasn't to be her day.
Fraud is broad. That is the heart of the decision.
Despite having hired some of the best and most expensive legal minds in Canada, Meng lost round 1. Associate Chief Justice Heather Holmes ruled the effects of the U.S. sanctions may properly play a role in the double criminality analysis. In other words, the charges she faces in the United States would stand in Canada. The CFO of Huawei and the daughter of its founder is accused of misleading American banks by neglecting to disclose a subsidiary company called Skycom, which did business in Iran. The U.S. says she committed fraud and violated sanctions against Iran. Meng was arrested in Canada in December 2018 at the request of the U.S. Her lawyers argued that Canada didn't have sanctions with Iran at the time, and Meng should be let go. The Crown argued that the overall allegation of fraud would be considered a crime in Canada, and therefore she must be extradited. Justice Holmes sided with federal lawyers. Ms. Meng's approach to the double criminality analysis would seriously limit Canada's ability to fulfill its international obligations in the extradition context for fraud and other economic crimes. Huawei Canada issued a statement that the company was disappointed and repeatedly expressed confidence in Ms. Meng's innocence. Huawei continues to stand with Ms. Meng in her pursuit for justice and freedom. Meng still has other legal maneuverings. There's a civil suit against the RCMP and Border Security, alleging that during the arrest, they questioned her without her lawyers present and took possession of her electronic devices.
They're betting the farm on the charter argument next.
Meng's team says there are still other legal rounds to go, so there isn't an appeal just yet. So she won't be taking off the electronic monitoring anklet that has become an accessory and a condition of her bail. Meng is paying for her own security while she's under house arrest here in Vancouver, and it doesn't look like she's going anywhere, especially to China, anytime soon. Donna?
Robin Gill in Vancouver, thanks. So much is resting on this case beyond the fate of Meng Wanzhou. Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor have been detained for more than 500 days in China without any consular access since the pandemic began. The Chinese government took them into custody shortly after Meng's arrest. And after today's ruling, China is even more furious. Abigail Bimman is in Ottawa with reaction to the ruling and what happens next. Abigail?
Donna, China is not happy with this development. In a strongly worded statement, the embassy here in Ottawa warns Canada not to go further down the wrong path, calling Meng's arrest arbitrary, saying the purpose of the United States is to bring down Huawei and Canada is an accomplice, and calling the whole case a grave political incident. But whether China chooses to retaliate and how remains to be seen. Initial reports in Chinese media suggest Canada has lost judicial independence to the U.S. The Global Times printing it makes Canada a pathetic clown and a scapegoat.
I think that in the hot and sour soup that is the Canada-China relationship, this has added a little bit more vinegar to that soup, and that we better watch Chinese attitudes carefully and address them as patiently and honestly as we can.
At the heart of this, there is much concern over what happens to Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, the two Canadians arbitrarily detained in the days following Meng's arrest, widely viewed as retaliation.
Abigail, what about the political reaction? Have we heard from the Canadian government?
Well, the Foreign Affairs Minister issued a statement in response to the ruling, saying Canada will continue to be transparent about the extradition process and advocating for the release of Kovrig and Spavor, saying that continues to be Canada's top priority. No comment from Justice Minister David Lametti today, and the Prime Minister has been clear about letting our independent justice system perform its duty. But that's been a big sticking point with Beijing, which doesn't subscribe to the rule of law. And now we're one step closer to the Justice Minister having to make a decision in this case, whether to send Meng to the United States. But this is a long road with many legal steps to go through first, including potential appeals.
It's critical that we are clear and resolute in communicating our principles, and as part of that, our commitment to the rule of law and how in Canada the extradition process is based on law, not on politics.
So potentially more pressure added to Canada-China relations. But in terms of Ottawa and Washington, we got a statement from the U.S. Department of Justice thanking Canada for its continued assistance in this matter. Donna?
Abigail Bimman in Ottawa, thank you. Advocates for China here in Canada are back in the headlines today over using government-supported forums to try and influence the public. A WeChat social media group run on behalf of Digital Government Minister Joyce Murray was used to crowdsource funding for a lawsuit against a global news journalist. He helped expose Chinese state-backed efforts to stockpile coronavirus safety supplies. Today, the Liberal MP from BC is being criticized and pressured to apologize for allowing it to happen. Conservative MP Rosemarie Falk pressed the issue in the House of Commons, and the Public Safety Minister came to Murray's defense.
One of the principles was strong democracy, a commitment to defend freedom of expression. Will the Liberals hold Joyce Murray's WeChat accountable if it has violated this part of the Charter?
I think as the minister has made very clear, she was not involved in this process and has no control over the individual that posted that matter.
Joyce Murray's communication team says the WeChat post was unacceptable and in no way reflects the minister's views. The U.S. president's latest threat coming up, why he's targeting social media platforms. There are demands for police officers in Minneapolis who were fired yesterday be charged with murder. They were involved in the arrest of an African-American man who died on Monday. Thousands of people flooded the streets today near the spot where George Floyd died. Late yesterday, the demonstrations became violent and officers used tear gas and rubber bullets. A bystander recorded the arrest. It shows an officer who is white using his knee to keep George Floyd pinned to the ground. You can hear him say, "Please, I can't breathe." He died shortly after this. Both the FBI and state law enforcement are now investigating his death. The American president, who loves to use Twitter, is now lashing out at social media platforms after Twitter fact-checked one of his tweets. Donald Trump says Republicans feel Twitter and other platforms silence conservative voices. Today, he threatened to strongly regulate them or shut them down. Twitter, he tweeted, has now shown that everything we have been saying about them is correct. Big action to follow. Twitter, for the first time, used a fact-check label on one of Trump's tweets with a link to information debunking his claims about mail-in voting fraud. Twitter says the messages contain potentially misleading information and have been labeled to provide additional context. It's a response to long-standing criticism Twitter is too hands-off when it comes to policing misinformation and falsehoods, including from world leaders like Trump.
Get sick and she'd had a stroke.
Still ahead, she discovered the truth of her mother's death by reading it in a military report. It's been more than 2 months that families of residents in long-term care homes have been unable to visit their loved ones. The agonizing wait was made worse by those military reports on the grim conditions they found inside some homes in Ontario and Quebec. Those soldiers are the only outside eyes and ears allowed into care homes, and their reports make devastating reading, especially for families with relatives inside. Jeff Semple has spoken to some of them.
Almost every day for 2 months, Michael Swans has waited outside this long-term care home, hoping to see his 93-year-old mother through her 4th-story window.
I hope for the best, and I just beam as much positive energy as I can towards the people in the place inside it.
But when he read the military's report from inside this and 4 other care homes,
the whole document was disappointing, and it felt like a punch in the gut.
His mother tested positive for COVID-19 a couple of weeks ago, but she's pulled through. Others have not.
This is a picture of my mom, June.
Pamela Bendall's 90-year-old mother, June, suffered from Parkinson's and dementia and couldn't speak. Staff at her care home were told she needed to be sitting up to eat and drink, or she could choke. Bendall even posted a photo with arrows and instructions on the wall next to her bed.
All you had to do was look at that picture, and I'd have a line to say, the pillow goes here. It was very clear.
But on May 8th, something went wrong.
I get a panic call from the nurse saying that my mother is not breathing.
Her death was ruled an accident. It wasn't until she saw the military's report that alleged staff weren't always sitting residents up, which appeared to have contributed to a patient's death.
I went on your website and read it, and I went, that's my mom. It's frustrating. I mean, your mother at 90 years old doesn't deserve to die like that.
Bendall actually worked as a personal support worker at the same home in the 80s. Her mother had been living here for 10 years. Bendel says she would find her covered in bruises, once with a broken toe. She says this care home was understaffed and resourced before the pandemic.
I just think it's impossible for that few of people to take care of the needs that these people require. You just do the bare minimum. So these are all things leading up to the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit.
Others with family members still inside these homes, like Flo Tompkinson missing her 87-year-old husband and wondering if she'll see him again.
It's obviously on lockdown and has been for a very long time, and there doesn't seem to be a way out.
Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Launch letdown. Next, the space milestone that's been postponed. Elon Musk will have to wait a little bit longer thanks to some bad weather in Florida today.
In Dragon SpaceX, unfortunately, we are not going to launch today.
At T-minus 16 minutes, the launch of his SpaceX rocket carrying 2 American astronauts was called off. When it happens, it will be the first ever commercial spaceflight to ferry humans into orbit, part of NASA's plan to have private companies service the International Space Station and beyond. The SpaceX Dragon is one of 2 private spacecraft under development for NASA right now. SpaceX and NASA will try again on Saturday. And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. We leave you tonight with a Canadian countdown. In 5 days, more than half of Canada's national parks will reopen for day use. Parks Canada closed all the sites in March because of COVID-19. On June 1st, 29 of our 48 national park sites will reopen with safety measures and physical distancing rules, giving Canadians a chance to get closer to nature and closer to normal. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.